Turn your head in Bristol and you're bound to see a name posted almost anywhere. Why do we see these names all around us? Who were they? What did they do? Why are they important? What's in a name? Out of all the names posted around Bristol, Anderson is hands down the most important. You can see the name Anderson all over the city, from the park to the street that bears the same name. If you drive along State Street, you'll eventually arrive at the East Hill Cemetery. Inside the historic site, you can find a giant marble stone that bears the name Joseph Ray Anderson, the man who founded Bristol. Anderson was born in 1819 in Carter Valley, where he would remain until his early teenage years. Around age 15, Anderson would leave his home and begin laying the foundation for his successful future.
His uncle, who ran a store in Bluntville, that'd be Samuel Ray. Joe Anderson's mother was a Ray, R-H-E-A. And his uncle Samuel Ray took him to be an apprentice in his store, gave him a job. He got room and board and just a few dollars a year for it, possibly $50 a year. And so he didn't remain in his native home very long, but he stayed with his uncle in Bluntville until he was grown and went out on his own. He got the education there that made him a successful merchant working in his uncle's store.
While living in Bluntville, Anderson met his wife, Melinda Williams King. She was the daughter of a prominent landowner in East Tennessee, Reverend James King.
Reverend King owned the land where downtown Bristol is and all around. It was around 2,000 acres altogether. And when the railroad survey showed that it was going to end in what they referred to it a lot of time as King's Meadows, he knew it'd be a good place to establish a city. Another railroad was coming from the southwest. Virginia and Tennessee was coming here from Lynchburg, and the East Tennessee and Virginia would come up from Knoxville, and they were to meet here. Well, he knew that even one railroad ending point or terminal point is a good place for a city, but here he had the double opportunity, two railroads coming to meet here. So he began immediately to try to buy the land. Old James King would hardly sell even 1 inch of land. He did finally, through the persuading of Anderson's wife, who was his daughter, he did sell him 100 acres. And as it came to be, that 100 acres was about half in Virginia and half in Tennessee. And that's why we're a double town today. After he bought the land, he had maps made, lots laid off, and streets laid off. It was a hodgepodge. It had to be a lot of changes done before the town really came to what it later was and what it is. But he then offered lots for sale. Scattered these handbills all up and down the road here. Knowing that the railroad was coming from Lynchburg, he had a lot of them distributed up in that direction. And thus, many old settlers in Bristol, their families can be traced back to somewhere between here and Lynchburg, or many of them in Lynchburg. But they came in other directions too, from Carter County, Scott County. And before you know it, he had a town going here. Actually, the town was laid out in 1852. There was not a house built on it till he built his own house in 1853. But strangely, after that, there was an explosion, more or less. By 1856, there was about 120 buildings in this little town that he had started just 4 or 5 years before. And since then, of course, it's grown to its present size.
Not only did Anderson get Bristol up and running, but he was also the first elected mayor of the town.
It wasn't long after the town was set up until they had to get the county to declare and set up a city election. And of course, they had to elect a city council, mayor, and so on. Anderson was elected the first mayor of Bristol, Tennessee.
Anderson also fought to no end to keep improving his town by bringing industry, education, businesses, and more to Bristol.
He never ceased to try to get something in here. The first stab he made was to get a doctor for the town. He said every town needs a doctor, so he talked B.F. Zimmerman and most people will think that's Benjamin Franklin, but it's actually Benjamin Frederick Zimmerman, who was practicing in Abingdon, having lots of competition up there, of course, and he was glad to get to come down here and set up as the first doctor in Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee. He didn't live to be very old. He died with this short time after he came here, but we had 2 or 3 more doctors by that time. And then he wanted a hotel for the town. He said every town needs a hotel. He had sold a lot to Alfred Wilson of Mountain City, and that lot would be now right in front of the First Baptist Church down here on East State. And there he started to build a store building, and Anderson talked him into adding a west side to it, even helped him, gave him a discount on his lot purchase to do that, to make a hotel. So he made a strange-like hotel on the west side of his store, but not like most hotels with a central hall. All the rooms were on the west side with the hall against the store building, so there's just rooms on one side of a hall upstairs. That became the first hotel, and for some reason Wilson gave it the name of Columbia, the Columbia Hotel he called it. Very soon one was built over near the depot that they called the Virginia House. It got to be more popular than the Columbia, of course, and then the Nichols House was set up, and from that Anderson had no problem with the hotels. They jumped up all around, people trying to get in on the ground floor. But he never ceased to try to bring something to the town. He did bring a lot of industry here, and he worked on it as long as he lived. He died in 1888, as the marker here says, but he continually fought to get more done for his town, and he had success. He lived to see it become a very large town, and his wife actually lived long enough to see it become a city. She outlived him by 20 years, and she actually saw it become a city.
Although Anderson became very wealthy, he stayed notoriously thrifty and always humble.
He became the town's biggest banker, and of course he controlled a lot of the comings because most people had to borrow money to buy their lots and so on. It didn't go to his head. He remained humble. He was a great Presbyterian, and of course they built a Presbyterian church right up the street from where his store was. And the men took turns about caring for the church as the janitor. That didn't have to hire a janitor. This man, looking for the banker, the town banker, wandered up that side street, up 4th Street, and he saw this old man with very rough clothing on sweeping the steps of the Presbyterian church. And he stopped and asked him about the bank and so on, where it was, I guess. Asked the location. And Anderson said, well, he said, I need to do some business there. And Anderson said, well, if you'll wait just a minute till I get the steps brushed off, I'll go with you. I'm the banker. I'm the president of the bank. So the man could hardly believe it. And as long as he lived, he'd work his own garden to a great extent. He was always conscious of saving a dime. I have an old letter his brother-in-law wrote to somebody else. And in that letter he said, Joe, and of course they know who he was talking about, said, Joe's still a-chasing those dimes. He got to be very wealthy, but he never lost sight of the fact that in order to keep his wealth, he had to stay pretty thrifty.
It would be quite a rarity today, but Anderson always stayed tight-lipped and never spoke about his business, even to his family.
You can get a little insight into his nature. He was real tight-lipped. No one knew much about what was going on. He kept it all to himself. He didn't have to ventilate and tell people about what he was doing and going on. One time somebody came into town and they either needed to rent a building or buy a building downtown. And somebody told him it belonged to Joseph Anderson. So, and they said he probably won't sell because it's against his religion almost to sell any property he has now. Of course, he sold a lots going and coming, but when he actually accumulated his own property, he would hardly sell anything. And somebody evidently told him that his wife persuaded her father to sell the town lot. Maybe his wife can persuade him. So they went to see her instead of him. And Aunt Melinda, kind, old, humble, refined lady she was, sat down with them in the parlor, and they told their business. She said, I don't know if Mr. Anderson owns that building. Mr. Anderson never talks to me about such things. She said, well, she actually didn't know a thing. He's the biggest banker in town, the biggest real estate owner probably, but she knew nothing about it. He never told her a thing about it. We wonder what they talked about, but I don't know.
Joseph Ray Anderson died in 1888 of typhoid fever. He left behind an incredible legacy, and he even went to the grave not knowing about the greater things that awaited him.
On the day that he died that night, about 2 a.m. the next morning actually. But on that day he was nominated for governor of Tennessee, but he never knew it. By the time the news got here by telegram, of course in those days, he was in a coma and never came out of it. So he never got to know that he was actually nominated for governor the day he died.
The citizens of Bristol still enjoy the fruits of Anderson's labor today. Bristol has evolved over time since its humble beginnings, and if Anderson could see it today, I'm sure he would agree that Bristol is indeed a good place to live.